Many skeptics argue that coincidences are nothing more than illusions created by our minds. According to this view, we tend to notice and remember only those events that, at first glance, seem somehow connected to each other, ignoring or forgetting an infinity of details that show no obvious connection. But how can you explain such an extraordinary and disturbing story as that of Charles Coughlan's wandering coffin? Is it really just a coincidence, or is there something more mysterious? Charles Coughlan was born in 1841 in the quiet Canadian province of Prince Edward Island, a place of unspoiled natural beauty, where the waves of the Atlantic gently lap the rocky shores and the forests extend to the sea. From a young age, Charles showed a passion for the theatre, a passion that prompted him to leave his native island to seek his fortune as an actor. At the time, a career in the theatre was not easy, but Charles made a name for himself through his talent and determination, starring in numerous traveling theatre companies that took him far and wide across North America. At the end of the 19th century, Charles Coughlan was in Galveston, a Texas city that, at that time, was the largest and most prosperous in the state. Located on a narrow barrier island along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, Galveston was known as the Ellis Island of the South, a crossroads of cultures and trade. But the city's beauty and prosperity concealed an inherent vulnerability. Its location made it extremely exposed to tropical storms and hurricanes that periodically hit the region. In 1899, while acting in one of the city's many theaters, Charles contracted one of the tropical fevers that, in those days, were a constant danger to anyone living in or visiting the warmer regions. The illness quickly worsened, and, despite treatment, Charles died, leaving an unbridgeable void in the hearts of his scene companions and those who had known him. He was buried in Galveston Cemetery, with full honors, in a leaded coffin, designed to protect the body from decay and the elements. However, Charles' eternal rest was soon interrupted by one of the most catastrophic events in American history. On September 8, 1900, a hurricane of unprecedented proportions struck Galveston. The winds, which exceeded 100 kilometers per hour, were only the beginning. A wall of water of more than 6 meters fell on the city, destroying buildings, submerging streets and wiping out everything in its path. About 7,000 people lost their lives that night, a number so high that the city struggled to manage the terrible tragedy. The dead were buried together with the living under a blanket of debris and rubble. But the fury of the waves did not spare even the cemeteries. The graves were uncovered, and the coffins, including that of Charles Coughlan, were torn from the ground and dragged away by the stormy sea. For many years, no one knew what had happened to Charles' body. His coffin, like so many others, seemed to have been swallowed by the Gulf of Mexico, destined to be lost forever. Yet, Charles Coughlan's story was far from over. His coffin, made of sturdy wood and sealed to withstand time, began an extraordinary journey through the tumultuous waters of the Gulf Stream. This powerful sea current, which flows from the Gulf of Mexico along the east coast of the United States to the North Atlantic, became Charles' new route of travel. For 8 long years, the coffin floated in the warm, murky waters of the Gulf, defying storms, giant waves, and the inexorable wear and tear of the sea. After rounding the Florida cliff, the coffin entered the Atlantic and began to slowly climb north. It passed the coasts of South and North Carolina, crossed the Chesapeake Bay, and continued its journey along the coast of New England. This incredible journey brought her closer and closer to her final destination, a place that no one could have ever imagined. In October 1908, a small fishing boat was sailing the waters off Prince Edward Island. The sea was calm, and the crew was busy hauling up their nets when they spotted something unusual floating on the water. Approaching cautiously, the fishermen discovered an old coffin, now battered and corroded by salt. Intrigued, they hoisted it on board using a hook and, to their surprise, found a copper plate attached to the wood. Above, engraved in characters now faded by time, there was an inscription, "Charles Coughlan." The fishermen were stunned. The coffin, which they had just recovered, was less than a kilometer from the small church where, many years earlier, Charles Coughlan had been baptized. It was a homecoming that seemed orchestrated by fate itself. With great respect, Charles' remains were transferred to a new coffin and given a new burial, this time right next to the church where it all began. The story of Charles Coughlan and his incredible journey is a tale that defies rational explanation. It's a mystery that leaves room for many questions. Was it really just a coincidence, or was there something deeper and more inexplicable at work? In any case, Charles Coughlan's wandering coffin remains one of the most striking examples of how, at times, reality can surpass fantasy, weaving the threads of fate in ways we can't even imagine.